And we've got Tyler in North Carolina. Pronouns are he, him. Welcome, Tyler.
Hey, so thanks for having me on the show. I'll try to get to my questions as quickly as possible, as opposed to just making a bunch of claims that are absolutely true just because I believe them to be the case. That drives me nuts, too.
Cool.
It's your show, so I came here with the questions for you. They will be propositions, which I'm asking you to give your answer of true or false. I can very quickly say why.
Have you ever watched the show, Tyler? What the hell makes you think that I'm sitting here and that Dave's sitting here so that we can be interviewed with narrow questions and trues and false only?
True, false, no commentary.
Yeah. By the way, this show is about what you believe and why. We're not sitting here just to be interviewed, but we do entertain this. So go ahead.
Sure. I understand. Well, look, I can very quickly say why I'm going to present you with a few propositions.
How about you stop with the preamble? You said you were not going to waste time and you were just going to get to it, and you keep going to preamble. Let's go.
Okay, so you just want me to ask my questions then?
Yes, Tyler, yes,
Dave,
please.
Dave started off.
Go.
Okay. First one, if God is not real, then God did not create all matter that exists.
Okay, first of all, I thought you were asking questions because that's not a question.
I'm already confused.
Just a statement.
No, it's a statement. It's a statement. I'm asking.
We're supposed to say true or false, right?
True or false.
So obviously, if God is not real, then He didn't create all matter. That has to be true. If He's not real, He can't
I will
create
agree.
anything.
True.
So.
Okay. Oh wait, no, hang on. That's not true. No, that's not true, because it's possible that God was real and is no longer real. And so there could have been a God that was real, created everything, and then ceased to exist. So you need to correct your premise there to say, if God is not and has never been real, then God did not create all matter that exists, in which case I would say true.
Agreed.
Okay, I agree with that. That's fine. Okay.
Cool.
So by contraposition, if God created all matter that exists, then God, and how did you phrase that again? I'm sorry. God has always
if
been.
He is, or if He's not real or never has been real, then He couldn't have created anything.
Okay.
So what's your next premise?
Right. Well, these are pretty obvious statements. That might be.
Well, your second statement is already wrong. Your second statement, at least as far as you got, suggested that it was going to be wrong, because you started with, and we'll say the sentence, if God is real, means if God has ever been, was ever real, will be real, etc. So when your first one was, if God's real, your first one was, if God is not real, then God didn't create all matter that exists. And I said true. Then you started saying your second one, which was, if God created all matter exists, then what?
Then God is real.
And we'll use that in the same sense that we agree. We'll use that in the same sense that we agree that God was at least real at the time that it existed, if in fact it created everything, all the matter that exists.
Right, and we're using that in the sense that He would have to be continuously real as of now.
Well, no. I do not believe that He would have to be continuously real. It's only God is real at the time that everything was created.
Okay, so let's back up for a second, because we might have a different definition of God, and if we do, then we're going to.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Progression here,
Tyler. It doesn't matter what.
Because
Tyler, stop and listen. It doesn't currently matter in this discussion what the definition of God is, because if we take the first statement, we could say, if God isn't real, then God didn't create all the matter that exists. But we could also say, if universe creating pixies aren't real, then universe creating pixies did not create all matter that exists. This is the way, when you're constructing a premise, it is content neutral. It doesn't prove anything either way. But it doesn't matter what your definition of X is, because you could say, if X is not real, then X did not create all matter that exists. And if X created all matter that exists, then X is real. The definition of God is irrelevant at this stage in the conversation.
Okay. I think that we should be using the same definitions of words in this.
Oh my fucking God. I think we should use the same meanings of words too. And when we get to
what is in the water today?
But why on earth is it? I just explained to you that we can replace God with X for both of those premises. Why is it? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
I understand what you're saying.
That statement is true, irrespective of what definition of God it is. I'm happy to talk about a definition of God, but it's not relevant to that. So where are we going?
Okay, so if you're happy to talk about it, let me define what I mean by when I say God. Okay. I'm talking about God necessarily cannot cease existing, for one thing, okay? So that's part of the definition there.
Okay, so you've got you've got a God who is always going to be. So that takes that part of the premise away.
Okay, that definition of God is not compatible with the sentences that you've used, because we defined the statement God is not real as in had to have been real at the time that it existed, but doesn't necessarily continue. So you're so focused on a particular definition of God that must continue that you didn't even notice that it does not fit with the two statements that you've already given. So if we define God as a necessary being that necessarily cannot cease existing, then your statement becomes, if a necessarily existing being did not create or isn't real, then that necessarily existing being did not create all matter that exists. But that's not true, because if there was a being that had ceased to exist when it created everything, that is a possibility that doesn't fit your example, because you've defined a God in a way that's incompatible with your own statements. Okay?
I'm not sure what you mean. I mean, the statement I made was, if God created all matter that exists, then God is real. Now, that's the contraposition of the first statement. I don't see why that would be inconsistent with, my position of God has always been, is now, and always will be.
Because the statement does not, you've given a property to God that is not required or addressed in the statement. So in order for something to create something, it has to exist at the time that thing is created to be its creator. That does not mean that it must continue to exist. Just like George Washington was the father of America, but he doesn't have to stay alive forever to be that in that position. That's a bad one because he didn't actually create America, but hopefully it's close enough an analogy. My grandmother had to exist in order to give birth to my mother, but that doesn't mean my grandmother needs to exist continually. You're adding a property to God that is not included in the statement.
So what is your further premise, Tyler? Where are you going with this?
Okay. So the real question that I wanted to get to is this.
Thank you.
And can we just assume for a second that this is an adequate definition for God?
Okay, let's just leave the definition of God.
What definition are you saying is adequate? Because if you're saying the only definition you gave for God is that God is a being that necessarily cannot cease existing, and no, that's not remotely an adequate definition for God.
Okay, well, we can go more. I mean, we can go into the attributes of God that.
Let's leave that alone. What is your premise about God? Let's forget about the definition of God for a minute. What's your point about this God, whatever it is?
Okay, so initially I was going to tell you that this is a question that I get a lot from atheists. Okay, they say, if God is real, then where is the evidence for God? And a lot of times they, mean different things by that. But primarily in my experience, as I've taught with atheists, they mean some sort of physical evidence for God. Okay, so this is the reason why. And I don't know if that's your position. I'm not trying to assume that. Okay, but this is going to tell me what your position was on this. That's why I'm presenting it this way. I was trying to do it as efficiently as I could out of respect for time for you guys. But so here's the next proposition. If all matter that exists is not physical evidence that God created all matter that exists, then God did not create all matter that exists. Would that be true or false?
False.
I'll read it again. I know that's a lot in one sentence, but it is if P, then Q. If all matter that exists is not physical evidence that God created all matter that exists, then God did not create all matter that exists. Would you say that's true or false?
False.
Okay. So if that is false, then one of the following two statements must be true. Okay. If God created all matter that exists, then only some specific matter that exists is physical evidence that God created that particular matter. Or if God created all matter that exists, then there's not any matter that exists that is physical evidence that God created that matter. So which one of those are you saying would necessarily be the case?
Congratulations, Tyler. You have now covered all your bases. If all matter that exists isn't physical evidence, then some matter is physical evidence, or none of it's physical evidence. Congratulations. You have covered all possible options. Now, show which one is true.
I'm asking you your position.
No, sir, that's not the way this works. I'm not aware of any physical evidence. I'm talking.
No, go ahead.
I'm not aware of any physical evidence that confirms that a God existed. But I would say it's possible for a God to create a universe, hypothetically, and for the physical facets of that universe, for none of it to be sufficient evidence to conclude that a God exists. And it's also possible for God to create a universe where none of it could ever point to a God. Are you suggesting that God cannot hide if it wants to? Is your God too weak to hide? Is there some thumbprint out there that necessarily points to him? If a God created a universe and did not want physical evidence of that to point back to him, is that impossible for God to create a universe that doesn't point back to him?
I got cut out for a second there, so if you just asked me a question, I just caught the very tail end of it.
Sure. Is it possible, in your hypothetical, is it possible for a God to create a universe intentionally so that no physical evidence exists in that universe that points to God?
Not in my conception of God, but certainly if you had a different conception of God, yeah.
Sure. So until you can prove that your conception of God is somehow the right one, then while we're still talking about a hypothetical God, it must be that no physical evidence is a the notion that no physical evidence points to God is a possibility. How do we rule out that possibility?
You want me to rule out all possibilities of different gods?
Well, no, sir. I want you to do whatever it takes to demonstrate that the God you believe in is real.
What we'd like you to do, Tyler, is to state your case and then back it up with something instead of dancing around different hypotheticals. Because the problem I see is that there are all these different concepts of God. And every caller has a different concept of God. Every person has a different concept of God. What we would like for you to do is to state clearly your concept of God. My question to you would be, do you believe in a personal God who's actively involved with his creation? If you do, then point to evidence. Okay, good. Then point to evidence that backs that up. Rather than trying to say that a God who's existed and does exist and will always exist creates all the matter that exists and can't be existing if the matter doesn't exist, and the pretzel logic of all of that, just state your case as to why you believe in this personal God who's actively involved with his creation, because I see no evidence of that.
Sure.
Your turn.
Yeah, look, the reason why I was calling, guys, I was trying to find out what your position is on this based on these questions.
If you're not going to, no, you're done, Tyler.
Answer
because
my question.
Dave just asked you a question. Are you going to answer it, or did you just call to interview us? Because if you want me to answer your question of what's the secret to life, the universe, and everything, it ain't going to be God. So are you going to answer Dave's question?
So Dave is saying I need to present a case for God.
For why you believe that God interacts with his creation You're claiming to detect something, and that means that God must manifest in some detectable way. Otherwise, you're saying you can detect the undetectable, which makes you nuts.
See, this would be like me.
You're saying that God is detectable. So how did you detect God?
I never made any claim like that.
Okay, goodbye, sir. You're done.
You
I'm
said
sorry.
you believe in a personal God who interacts with his creation. When I posited that, you said yes. So show me evidence for that God.
Why do I have to show you evidence for that God?
You don't, but that's what you should do. We ask people who call in the show to state your case and back it up. And what you're saying is you have no evidence for that.
Tyler, are you a Christian?
No, I'm not saying that.
Tyler, are you a Christian?
What are you saying?
Tyler, are you a Christian?
Yep.
You are? I can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Are you a Christian?
I said yes. I guess you couldn't hear me.
Okay. What's 1 Peter 3:15 say?
Are you talking about the apologetic verse?
I asked you, what does 1 Peter 3:15 say? Do you not know?
Do you want me to quote it, or I don't know it. I couldn't.
Roughly, just be ready to give an answer. That one, is that the one, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, if Tyler's going to ask us why he needs to provide evidence, well, number one, because you called into a call-in show where you're expected to defend your beliefs, and because Dave asked you, and because I answered your questions and exposed the logical problems in your argument, and because you're a Christian and 1 Peter 3:15 fucking tells you to.
Okay. All right. Well, let me tell you this, okay, about the burden of proof. I think the burden of proof claim is
I don't care what you think about the burden of proof claim. I'm moving on to other callers.
He's throwing it back on us. I get so tired of that.